Now it's my turn to watch their world fall apart.
The eviction notice was still taped to my door when I found the lawyer's letter wedged underneath it. Funny how life works. One piece of paper threatening to throw me out on the street, another promising to change everything. I'm Max Harlan, 32 years old, and up until 3 months ago, I thought I had it all figured out. Marriage to Julia, the kind of woman who made other men jealous just by walking into a room. A house in the suburbs with a 2-car garage. Even a golden retriever named Murphy who actually came when I called him. Then I came home early from my construction job one Tuesday and found my wife screaming my best friend Eric's name in our bedroom. Not exactly the homecoming I'd planned. The divorce papers came 2 weeks later. Julia got the house, half my savings, and somehow convinced the judge that Murphy would be better off in a stable environment. Eric got my wife. I got the studio apartment that smells like the previous tenant's chain-smoking habit, and a front row seat to watch my entire life get redistributed to people who'd stabbed me in the back. But this letter was different. Dear Mr. Harlan, it read in formal legal typeface. You are hereby notified that you are the sole beneficiary of the estate of Victor Harlan, deceased. Please contact our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the inheritance. Victor Harlan. The name rang a distant bell, like an echo from childhood. My father's brother, maybe? The family black sheep who disappeared when I was still in elementary school? I remembered whispers at family gatherings, adults changing the subject when us kids got too curious about Uncle Victor. The law office was downtown, occupying 3 floors of a glass tower that made my work boots feel out of place on the marble lobby floor. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair, looked me up and down before buzzing me through to see Mr. Patterson, the estate attorney. Patterson was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who handled mysterious inheritances, thin, sharp-eyed, with the kind of expensive suit that cost more than I made in 2 months. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than my rent. Mr. Harlan, he began, sliding a thick folder across his mahogany desk. I'll be direct. Your Uncle Victor left you his entire estate. The liquid assets alone total $127 million. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud in this fancy office with its oil paintings and crystal paperweights. You've got the wrong guy. I'm a construction worker from Queens. I drive a 10-year-old pickup truck and eat cereal for dinner. Patterson didn't even crack a smile. Victor Harlan was your father's older brother. He made his fortune in real estate development and private investments. He never married, had no children of his own, and apparently kept very close tabs on his family members. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written across it in careful handwriting. He left this for you personally. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery and a small key. Max, the letter began, I've been watching your life from a distance, and I know what happened with Julia and Eric. I know about the divorce, the house, everything. What you don't know is that Eric Cross is my biological son. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Eric was Victor's son, my cousin? I gave him up for adoption when he was born, the letter continued. Biggest mistake of my life. I tried to reconnect with him 5 years ago, told him who I was, offered him everything. He laughed in my face, said he didn't need anything from some old man he'd never met. Said he had his own plans for getting rich, and they involved your wife. The room started spinning. Eric knew. He knew he was my cousin when he started sleeping with Julia. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated, deliberate destruction of my life by my own family. The key opens a storage unit downtown. Address is on the back of this letter. Inside, you'll find everything you need to know about Eric's real business dealings and Julia's involvement. Consider this my apology for the son I failed to raise properly, and your chance to set things right. Patterson cleared his throat. There are conditions to the inheritance. Nothing illegal, you understand? But Victor was very specific about certain requirements that must be met before the funds are fully released. What kind of requirements? The full details are in the storage unit, but I can tell you this much. Victor believed very strongly in justice. He spent the last 2 years of his life documenting every lie, every scheme, every betrayal that led to your current situation. He wants you to use that information. I walked out of that office in a daze, the key burning a hole in my pocket. $127 million. more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But that wasn't what made my hands shake as I drove across town to the storage facility. It was the knowledge that Eric, my best friend since high school, my best man, the guy I'd trusted with my life, had known we were family the whole time he was planning to destroy me. The storage unit was bigger than my apartment. File cabinets lined the walls, and a large desk sat in the center with a computer and multiple monitors. Victor had been thorough. Financial records, photographs, recorded phone conversations, email printouts. It was like a private investigator's wet dream. I spent 4 hours going through it all, and by the time I was finished, I understood exactly what kind of man my cousin really was. Eric Cross wasn't just a cheating friend. He was a con artist, a fraud, and apparently he'd been using Julia to get access to information about my construction company's upcoming contracts. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Eric would seduce my wife, get her to file for divorce, and take half my assets, then use her connections in the city planning office where she worked to feed him inside information about upcoming development projects. Julia probably thought she was just getting a richer husband. She had no idea she was being used as a corporate spy. But Victor had documented everything: bank transfers, recorded conversations, even photographs of Eric meeting with competitors and handing over confidential documents that could only have come from Julia's office. The last file on the desk was labeled The Plan. Inside was a detailed strategy for exposing everything, destroying both their reputations and making sure they lost everything they'd stolen from me. It was thorough, legal, and absolutely devastating. At the bottom of the file was a handwritten note: Max, they took everything from you because they thought you were powerless. Show them what power really looks like. Make me proud, Uncle Victor. I sat back in the desk chair, surrounded by evidence of the most elaborate betrayal I could have imagined, and for the first time in 3 months, I smiled. Julia and Eric thought they'd won. They thought they'd destroyed the pathetic construction worker and walked away with everything that mattered. They had no idea the game was just beginning. The first thing I did was move out of that roach-infested studio apartment. Victor's inheritance came with a penthouse downtown. Apparently, he'd owned the entire building. 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a kitchen bigger than my old house. The contrast wasn't lost on me. 3 months ago, I was eating ramen noodles and wondering how I'd make rent. Now I was living like a king, but I wasn't ready to reveal my new circumstances yet. Victor's plan required patience, careful timing, and most importantly, the element of surprise. Julia and Eric needed to believe I was still the broken, defeated man they'd left behind. So I kept driving my old pickup truck and wearing my work clothes, but now I had resources they couldn't imagine. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. Not some cheap divorce detective, but a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen, who specialized in financial crimes. If Victor's documentation was accurate, and I had no reason to doubt it, Eric and Julia were about to face federal charges for insider trading and corporate espionage. "This is impressive work," Sarah said, reviewing Victor's files in my new penthouse office. "Your uncle was methodical. Look at this. He's got Eric on tape, discussing specific city contracts 3 days before they were publicly announced. And here's Julia accessing confidential files on her work computer at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. How long before we can move on this? That depends on what kind of justice you're looking for. We could turn this over to the FBI tomorrow, and they'd both be arrested within a week. But if you want to destroy them the way they destroyed you, reputation, finances, social standing, that takes a more subtle approach." I thought about it. Prison would be satisfying, but it would also be over too quickly. They'd serve their time and get out, maybe even write books about their experiences. Victor's plan was more comprehensive. He wanted them to lose everything slowly, publicly, the same way they dismantled my life piece by piece. What did you have in mind? Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Your ex-wife works in the city planning office, right? Very public position, lots of visibility in the community. Eric runs that auto repair shop, depends on his reputation for honest business dealings. What if that reputation started to crumble? Over the next 2 weeks, I learned more about psychological warfare than I'd ever wanted to know. The key, according to Sarah, was making them destroy themselves. Plant the right seeds of doubt, apply pressure in the right places, and people would turn on each other faster than you'd believe. We started small. Anonymous tips to Eric's customers about irregularities in his billing practices. Nothing specific enough to be traced back to us, just enough to make people start asking questions. A few phone calls to Julia's coworkers mentioning concerns about her late-night computer access. Again, nothing actionable, just enough to plant seeds of suspicion. The beauty of Victor's documentation was that we didn't need to make anything up. Every anonymous tip was backed by solid evidence. We were just helping people discover the truth. I also started following them, learning their routines. Julia had moved into Eric's house, my old house technically, since she'd gotten it in the divorce. They'd redecorated, of course. New furniture, new paint, even a new mailbox, trying to erase every trace of the life she'd shared with me. Eric had expanded his auto shop, using money that I now knew came from selling information about my construction company's bids to our competitors. He'd bought new equipment, hired additional mechanics, even started advertising on local radio. Success built on betraying the man who'd trusted him most. Watching them together was educational. They weren't happy. Oh, they put on a good show in public, holding hands at restaurants, posting cute couple photos on social media. But I could see the cracks. Julia was high maintenance in ways that Eric wasn't prepared for. She'd gotten used to a certain lifestyle during our marriage, and Eric's auto shop, legitimate income aside, couldn't support her shopping habits. More importantly, they were paranoid. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe they were smarter than I'd given them credit for, but they were constantly looking over their shoulders. Julia had changed her computer passwords at work. Eric had installed a security system at the shop. They were acting like people who knew they had enemies. They were right. The first major crack in their relationship came 3 weeks into my surveillance. I was sitting in my truck across from Eric's shop when I saw Julia storm out, screaming at him in the parking lot. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Money problems. That's when I knew it was time to escalate. Sarah had prepared what she called Phase 2 of Victor's plan. If Phase 1 was about planting seeds of doubt, Phase 2 was about applying direct pressure. We had evidence of Eric's fraud going back 2 years. We had documentation of Julia's unauthorized access to confidential city planning documents. We had recorded conversations of them planning to use insider information for personal profit. But instead of turning it over to the authorities, we were going to use it as leverage. The beauty of blackmail, and yes, I understood that's what this was, is that it forces people to make increasingly desperate choices. Push someone hard enough, and they'll eventually push back in ways that destroy them. I spent that evening in Victor's old office, reading through his personal journals. My uncle had been a patient man, but he'd also been ruthless when necessary. One entry, dated just 6 months before his death, laid out his philosophy clearly. Max doesn't know it yet, but he's about to learn the most important lesson of his life. The world is divided into 2 types of people, those who take what they want and those who let it be taken from them. Eric and Julia are takers. They saw something they wanted and they took it, consequences aside. Max has been a giver his whole life, trusting and generous to a fault. But every man has a breaking point. When Max reaches his, I want him to have the tools he needs to take back everything that was stolen from him, and more. I closed the journal and looked out at the city lights below. Tomorrow, Julia and Eric were going to learn that the broken, defeated man they'd betrayed was gone forever. In his place stood someone with unlimited resources, detailed knowledge of their crimes, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The war was about to begin in earnest. I decided to start with Eric. Men like him, cocky, aggressive, used to intimidating others, they react predictably when their world starts falling apart. Push them hard enough and they'll lash out, usually in ways that make everything worse for themselves. The auto shop was busy when I walked in Tuesday morning, still wearing my construction clothes and driving my beat-up truck. To anyone watching, I was just Max Harlan, the pathetic ex-husband who couldn't afford to get his vehicle serviced anywhere better. Eric was in the back bay, working under the hood of a BMW. He looked good, better than he had any right to look. New clothes, expensive watch, the kind of confident swagger that comes from thinking you've gotten away with something. Well, well, he said, straightening up when he saw me. Look what the cat dragged in. Max Harlan in the flesh. Hello, Eric. Truck's been making some noise. Thought you might take a look. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, grinning like this was the best part of his day. Sure thing, buddy. Always happy to help out an old friend, even if that old friend can't afford to pay his bills. The casual cruelty in his voice was exactly what I'd expected. Eric had always been a bully, but success had made him worse. He thought he was untouchable now. Actually, I said, pulling out a manila envelope from my jacket, I wanted to talk to you about bills, specifically some bills you've been paying with money that doesn't belong to you. His smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? I opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. Eric meeting with Tony Marchetti, the owner of Marchetti Construction, my biggest competitor. The photo showed Eric handing Tony a folder of documents. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 days before Marchetti had underbid us on the Morrison project by exactly $2,000. Interesting picture, don't you think? That's you, selling confidential information about my company's bids to my competitors. Information you could only have gotten from Julia's access to city planning documents. Eric's face went white, then red. You son of a witch. You've been following me. I've been investigating you. There's a difference. I pulled out another photograph, this one showing Eric depositing a check at the bank the same day he'd met with Marchetti. $5,000, exactly what Tony paid you for that information. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. I pulled out a third document, a bank record showing the deposit, with Marchetti Construction listed as the source. Tony's not very good at covering his tracks. Neither are you. Eric stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. We were about the same height, but he'd always been broader through the shoulders. In high school, that had been enough to make me back down from confrontations. But I wasn't in high school anymore, and I wasn't the same man who'd trusted him with my life. What do you want? He asked. I want you to understand something, Eric. You think you destroyed me. You think you took everything that mattered and left me with nothing. But you made one crucial mistake. Yeah, what's that? You assumed I'd stay destroyed. I put the photographs back in the envelope and tucked it under my arm. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to end things with Julia. Today. You're going to tell her it was all a mistake, that you never loved her, that you were just using her to get back at me. Then you're going to close this shop, liquidate your assets, and disappear. Eric laughed, but it sounded forced. Or what? Or I'd turn this evidence over to the FBI, the IRS, and the state licensing board. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, Eric. So is tax evasion, which I'm betting you're guilty of since you probably didn't report that $5,000 from Tony as income. You'll lose the shop, the house, and probably spend the next 5 to 10 years in federal prison. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. Sarah Chen, former FBI financial crimes investigator. I've got her on speed dial. Want me to make the call right now? For the first time since I'd known him, Eric looked genuinely scared. The cocky swagger was gone, replaced by the desperate calculation of a man trying to figure out how to save himself. You bastard, he whispered. You actually think you can threaten me? I'm not threatening you, Eric. I'm giving you a choice. Take the easy way out, or let me destroy you the same way you destroyed me, slowly, publicly, and completely. He swung at me then, a wild right hook aimed at my jaw. But I'd been expecting it. Eric had always been predictable when he was angry, and I'd spent 3 months thinking about this moment. I ducked under his punch and drove my fist into his solar plexus, doubling him over. As he gasped for air, I grabbed him by the shirt and slammed him against the workbench. That's for sleeping with my wife, I said quietly, so the other mechanics couldn't hear. This is for thinking I was too weak to fight back. I hit him again, a short uppercut that snapped his head back and split his lip. Red streaks ran down his chin as he stared at me in shock. You've got 24 hours, I told him, straightening my jacket. End it with Julia, or I end you. I walked out of the shop without looking back, leaving Eric injured and humiliated in front of his employees. The old Max would have felt guilty about the violence. The old Max would have worried about consequences, about what people would think. But the old Max was dead. Victor's inheritance had given birth to someone harder, someone who understood that sometimes you had to hurt people to make them listen. My phone rang as I drove away. Sarah Chen. How did it go? She asked. Exactly like you predicted. He's scared, angry, and probably about to make a very stupid decision. Good. Phase 3 is ready when you are. What's Phase 3? We make Julia choose between saving herself and saving him. My experience says she'll choose herself every time. I smiled as I hung up the phone. Eric had always underestimated me, treated me like the weak link in our friendship. Julia had seen me as safe, reliable, boring, someone to be discarded when a more exciting option came along. They were both about to learn how dangerous it was to underestimate a man with nothing left to lose and unlimited resources for revenge. The real war was just beginning. Eric lasted 18 hours before he cracked. I was in my penthouse office the next evening, reviewing Sarah's plans for Phase 3, when my phone rang. Julia's number. Max? Her voice was shaky, uncertain. We need to talk. Hello, Julia. How's married life treating you? Don't be an A. Eric told me about your little visit to the shop, about your threats. Threats? I prefer to think of them as promises. There was a long pause. What do you want? I want to see you, both of you. Tonight, there's a coffee shop on 5th Street called Brennan's. Meet me there in an hour. Max, if you think you can intimidate us, 1 hour, Julia. Don't be late. I hung up before she could respond. Sarah had chosen Brennan's specifically, public enough that they'd feel safe, but with secluded booths where we could talk privately. More importantly, she'd already positioned recording equipment throughout the cafe. Everything that was said tonight would be documented. They arrived together, but the body language told the whole story. Julia walked in first, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her posture rigid with barely controlled anger. Eric followed a step behind, a bandage covering his split lip and his eyes constantly scanning the room like he expected an ambush. They looked like what they were, criminals who knew they'd been caught. I was already seated in a corner booth, wearing a suit that cost more than Eric made in a month. It was a calculated choice. They expected to see broken, defeated Max in his construction clothes. Instead, they got someone who looked like he belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. You look different, Julia said, sliding into the booth across from me. Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. This wasn't the man she'd divorced. Money has a way of changing people, I replied. You should know that better than anyone. Eric remained standing, trying to loom over the table. Let's cut the crap, Max. What's this really about? Sit down, Eric. You're making a scene. He glanced around the cafe, noticed the other customers staring, and reluctantly took a seat next to Julia. The split lip made him look like a common thug, which wasn't far from the truth. I'll make this simple, I began, pulling out a tablet and placing it on the table. 3 months ago, you destroyed my life. You took my wife, my house, my business prospects, even my dog. You left me with nothing but debt and humiliation. That's not, Julia started. I'm not finished. The steel in my voice made her flinch. What you didn't know is that your boyfriend here is my cousin. Eric's biological father was Victor Harlan, who died 6 weeks ago and left me his entire fortune. $127 million to be exact. The color drained from both their faces. Eric's mouth fell open. Julia's perfectly manicured hands started shaking. But Uncle Victor left me more than money, I continued, touching the tablet screen. He left me information about Eric's real business dealings, about Julia's unauthorized access to confidential city documents, about the conspiracy to defraud my construction company using insider information. I turned the tablet around so they could see the screen. Bank records, photographs, recorded conversations, a fraction of Victor's evidence, but enough to make my point. This is impossible, Julia whispered. How could he know? Victor spent 2 years documenting your crimes. He knew Eric was using you to get inside information about city contracts. He knew you were accessing confidential planning documents and sharing them with Eric. He knew Eric was selling that information to my competitors. Eric found his voice. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can prove all of it. The question is what I do with the proof. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the fear in their eyes. I could turn it over to the FBI tomorrow. Corporate espionage, insider trading, conspiracy to commit fraud. You're looking at federal charges, probably 5 to 10 years each. What do you want? Julia asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything, the same way you made me understand it. I touched the tablet again, bringing up a new screen. Financial records showing Eric's shop, Julia's savings account, their mortgage payments. Here's what's going to happen, Eric. You're going to confess to your customers that you've been overcharging them for parts and labor. You're going to refund every penny of the money you stole, which should bankrupt the shop within a month. That's insane. Julia, you're going to resign from the city planning office. You're going to admit that you've been accessing confidential documents inappropriately and that you can no longer be trusted with sensitive information. I'll never, or, I continued, raising my voice slightly, I release all of this evidence to the authorities, the media, and your employers simultaneously. Your choice. Eric slammed his fist on the table, making the coffee cups jump. You son of a witch. You think you can just waltz back into our lives and destroy everything we've built? Everything you built was stolen from me, I replied calmly. I'm just taking it back. Julia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Max, please. We can work something out. We can pay you back. Make this right. Make it right? I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make other customers look in our direction. You want to make it right? You destroyed my marriage, my business, my reputation. You took everything I cared about and threw it away like garbage. Now you want to work something out? We never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. It just happened. We fell in love, and you fell in love with the money Eric was making by betraying me. Don't pretend this was some grand romance. You're a gold digger, Julia, and Eric is a con artist. You deserve each other. Eric started to stand up again, his face red with rage. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this. Yes, you are. I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen. One button, and this evidence goes to the FBI, the IRS, the state attorney general, and every major news outlet in the city. Your choice. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He slumped back into his seat, looking older than his 32 years. How long do we have? Julia asked. 72 hours. Eric confesses to his customers and begins making refunds. Julia submits her resignation letter. Both of you issue public apologies for your actions. And if we do this, you'll destroy the evidence? I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I didn't say that. I said I wouldn't turn it over to the authorities immediately. But this evidence exists forever, and so does my memory of what you did to me. Cross me again, and I'll finish what I started. They left the cafe in silence, holding hands like survivors of a natural disaster. Which, in a way, they were. Hurricane Max had just torn through their lives, and the cleanup was going to take years. I sat in the booth for another hour, watching the other customers go about their normal lives. Happy couples sharing dessert, friends laughing over coffee, students studying for exams. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 3 feet away, a man had just destroyed 2 people who'd thought they were untouchable. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Phase 4, ready when you are. I typed back, what's Phase 4? We make sure they can never hurt anyone else the way they hurt you, permanently. I finished my coffee and walked out into the night air. The city looked different now, brighter, full of possibilities instead of threats. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Julia and Eric thought tonight was the end of their punishment. They had no idea it was just the beginning. 3 days later, Eric's auto shop was in chaos. I sat in my truck across the street, watching angry customers storm in and out of the building. Word had spread quickly after Eric's confession, a carefully worded statement admitting to billing irregularities and promising full refunds. What he hadn't anticipated was how many people would demand immediate payment, or how quickly his insurance company would drop him once they learned about potential fraud claims. Sarah had been right about Phase 4. It wasn't enough to make them confess. We had to ensure the consequences were permanent and public. Eric's reputation in the automotive industry was finished. No one would trust a mechanic who admitted to overcharging customers, regardless of his reasons for coming clean. Julia's downfall had been even more spectacular. Her resignation from the city planning office had made the local news, with reporters speculating about ethical violations and unauthorized access to confidential documents. Her new job applications were being rejected before she could even get interviews. Word traveled fast in city government circles. But I wasn't satisfied yet. Victor's plan had one final phase, and it was the most important one. That evening, I invited them both to dinner. The restaurant was Chez Laurent, the most expensive place in the city, the kind of establishment where Julia had always wanted to celebrate anniversaries, but which I'd never been able to afford on a construction worker's salary. The irony wasn't lost on me. They arrived looking like different people. Eric wore a cheap suit that didn't fit properly, his confidence replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who knew he was beaten. Julia had traded her designer clothes for a simple black dress, her makeup unable to hide the stress lines around her eyes. I was waiting at a corner table, wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo and drinking wine that cost more than they'd made in the past month combined. "Thank you for coming," I said as they sat down. "I thought it was time we had a proper conversation about the future." "What future?" Eric asked bitterly. "You've destroyed everything we had." "I've destroyed everything you stole," I corrected. "There's a difference." The waiter appeared, and I ordered for all of us, the most expensive items on the menu. Julia started to protest, but I cut her off. "Don't worry about the cost. This is my treat. Consider it a farewell dinner." "Farewell?" Julia's voice was barely audible. I reached into my jacket and pulled out 2 envelopes. "Eric, this contains a cashier's check for $50,000 and a bus ticket to Seattle. There's a job waiting for you at a garage owned by a friend of mine. Entry-level position, minimum wage, but it's honest work." Eric stared at the envelope like it might explode. "Why?" "Because despite everything you've done, you're still family. Victor may have given up on you, but I won't. This is your chance to start over, build something legitimate." I turned to Julia and handed her the second envelope. "This contains a check for $25,000 and information about a job opening with an environmental consulting firm in Portland. They don't know about your situation here. It's a fresh start." She opened the envelope with trembling hands. "I don't understand. After everything we did to you, why would you help us?" "Because I'm not you," I replied simply. "I don't destroy people for the pleasure of watching them suffer. I wanted justice, not revenge. There's a difference." Eric was reading the job description, his expression shifting from suspicion to something that might have been hope. "This is legitimate. No strings attached." "One string," I said. "You both disappear tonight. You take these opportunities and you never come back to this city. You never contact me, never try to return to your old lives, never attempt to cause problems for anyone here. In exchange, I'll make sure the federal investigation into your activities quietly disappears." "Federal investigation?" Julia went pale. "Did you think I was bluffing about the FBI? They've been building a case for 2 weeks. The only reason you're not in handcuffs right now is because I asked them to wait. But that protection ends at midnight tonight." The food arrived, but none of us touched it. Eric was staring at the check like he couldn't believe it was real. Julia was crying again, but quietly this time. "Why?" she asked. "After everything we put you through, why give us a way out?" I thought about Victor's journals, about his regrets over the son he'd given up, about the man he'd become in his pursuit of wealth and power, about the choice between justice and vengeance, between healing and perpetual anger. "Because staying angry at you would make me into someone I don't want to be," I said finally. "You hurt me, betrayed me, tried to destroy me. But I survived. I'm stronger now, richer, more successful than I ever dreamed possible. Keeping you around as targets for my revenge would just hold me back from building something better." Eric folded the papers and put them in his pocket. "The job in Seattle. Is it real?" "It's real. My friend Tom owns 3 shops out there. Work hard, prove yourself, and you could be managing one of them within a year. It's more than you deserve, but it's what you need." Julia was reading her job offer through her tears. "Environmental consulting. I always wanted to do something that mattered. Now you can. Help clean up the environment instead of helping to corrupt it." They left the restaurant separately, Eric heading to his apartment to pack, Julia returning to the house that had once been mine to collect her things. I sat alone at the table, finishing the expensive wine and thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, I'd been a simple construction worker with a cheating wife and a disloyal best friend. Tonight, I was a millionaire who'd just given his enemies a second chance at life. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Are you sure about this? We had them dead to rights." I typed back, "Victor spent his whole life accumulating enemies. I'd rather build something positive with the time I have left." An hour later, I was back in my penthouse, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding my construction company, but this time with unlimited capital and hard-earned wisdom about who to trust. I would use Victor's money to create jobs, build homes, maybe even fund scholarships for kids who needed second chances. Eric and Julia were probably on buses by now, heading toward uncertain but possible futures. They would struggle, work harder than they ever had, face the consequences of their choices every day. But they would also have the opportunity to become better people than they'd been. That was justice. Real justice, not the hollow satisfaction of revenge. I raised my wine glass in a toast to the empty room. Thank you, Uncle Victor, for the money, for the lessons, and for showing me that the best way to defeat your enemies is to refuse to become like them. Outside, the city hummed with 8 million stories of triumph and failure, love and betrayal, second chances and final judgments. I was just one man among millions, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I understood my place in the larger story. I had been broken, but I had chosen to heal rather than to break others in return. I had been betrayed, but I had chosen to offer redemption rather than destruction. I had been given power, and I had chosen to use it to build rather than to tear down. The old Max Harlan was dead, destroyed by the people who should have loved him most, but the new Max Harlan, the one born from Uncle Victor's inheritance and tempered by betrayal, he was just getting started, and his story was going to be magnificent.